Hello, my name is Tova Cook and welcome to my home art studio. I hardly ever do this, but today I actually want to make some clay. So actually at the pottery studio, we have just started our 6-week intro class. So this week, starting today, is the second day in the class where we will practice centering and go through all of the steps. At this time in the class, people kind of forget all of the mini steps that there is, and so they want to be reminded, and they usually ask and request for the instructors to share some YouTube videos that could be helpful. So I thought maybe I could actually do what I do when I'm at home. So this video is a how-to video on how to throw pottery step by step within your home studio. And so I'm starting fresh. I have a clean, dry wheel. I've already wedged 2 balls of clay. I also have a few tools. I have a needle tool that I'm going to use. I have a rib tool, and I have a wire cutting tool for the end, and some sort of scraper tool. I also have 3 buckets. I have 1 bucket to put all of my slop in because I like to save and recycle all of my clay. I have my water bucket that I'm going to be using back and forth, and then I have a clean bucket of water that I'm going to use right at the end to clean my hands off. I mean, you don't have to have all of these things. It's just something that I like to keep right beside me to make sure I don't have to get up with clay hands and move to the next room of my apartment and bring clay and silica with me everywhere I go. So, okay, let's get started. So I'm gonna slam down my ball of clay, aiming for the center of the wheel. And I'm not really good at throwing, so I'm gonna throw it down and then just push it to the center. I then use the sides of my palms to press down on the clay, pushing down, making sure it actually sticks and stays down to the wheel. Because the worst thing that would happen is that the clay is not actually attached to the wheel and it just flies off in the middle of throwing. And then the final thing I do to make sure it's sealed, I use my finger to lock down the side of the piece. Okay, so the first thing that we're actually gonna do is get our hands wet. Oh, I forgot to get a sponge. Okay, now that I got a sponge, the first thing we're gonna do is get our clay wet, and we're gonna get our piece to be centered. So I'm gonna use my dominant hand to push down on the clay, and I'm using a lot of force pressing down. I get my wheel going to about 80% speed. And as you can see, the clay is starting to rise. So this is when I just like place my left hand right on top. And keeping my left hand right on top, off to the side. You can kind of see where it's sitting at. It's off to the palm. I'm not really pressing down really hardly on top of the clay. It's just off to the side to make sure it doesn't become a tall cone. And this is where I start. I don't actually start doing the pull coning up and down until you have the basic understanding of using pressure with your right hand. So I'm going to do this a couple times. And I'm pushing actually to the left at an angle and less to the center. And actually, just to note that my hand is at 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. It's less in front of me and it's more tucked back in. And the reason why is because I'm using my elbow to rest on my leg, and I'm really leaning over and putting pressure down with my body weight. And I'm using a bit of my body to really help ground me and put pressure into the piece. So if the piece feels like it's getting off, then check to make sure that your elbows are resting on your legs and you're anchored down. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start coning up and down. So this is where I actually, instead of placing my left hand on the top, I'm going to move it down to the side, and I'm going to allow it to help sculpt it and allow it to rise up into a cone. And I'm going to lift my hands up at the same time as I'm doing that. So I'm keeping my pressure down on my right hand. So it's pushing off to the side. Left hand is just sculpting it as it rises up. I'm going to use my left hand to press it down. So I use my left hand to start at the top. I over-exaggerate that tilt. Use my right hand to jam it back down, just right at the top, for it to come into a gumdrop again. And I'm going to do this a couple times because I'm using a very, very dry ball of clay. So I might need to get it going a couple times. Some things that I see that happen that are pretty common are like students just jam straight down. And if you jam straight down, it actually becomes a mushroom. And there's usually an indent and a gap in between that piece. And so we want to avoid that. The second thing I see is that people really jam hard all the way to the base. And so when you lift it up to be another cone, it caves in. And so we typically don't want to like jam so hard. We don't need this to be really flat against the wheel. We just need to pull the clay up and down in an angled motion. I lost my piece of clay. So what happened here is I squeezed my hand a little bit too tight. My clay was a little bit dry, and so it pulls off the piece of the clay. So we don't have to necessarily start over. We could actually take what's here and push all the clay into the center of the wheel. So I'm just making a smaller piece. Okay, so we have a very small gumdrop. Now we can go on and start working on the base. I'm keeping both of my hands in the butterfly position. I like to have my wrist locked. I'm still leaning over, elbows are resting on my legs, and I press down directly with my thumbs down to the base of my clay, giving myself about a half an inch to the bottom. Once I get to the base, I then use my thumbs to widen out horizontally. And this is less of a caressing motion. It's pretty fast, and I'm just focused on compressing the base of the piece. And I'm not going to go out farther than the outer edge of the piece, just for this instructional purpose. Okay, so that's the second step. The second step should look like something like a gumdrop form. The third step I'm going to pull up the walls. So I kind of make a position like this. Left hand is making a C, right hand is straight, and I like to interlock my hands. Again, my right hand is resting on my leg. Left hand, the fingertips are pulling into me. Right hand is pushing against me. So this is what it kind of looks like off to the side, but I'm doing this more at 6 o'clock. So I do slow down my wheel at this point, and I'm pushing in with both fingers and lifting up my hands at the same time, forcing the clay to rise with me. So as you can see, the clay rises when you push in with your fingertips from both left and right hands. And what I noticed on the third step, people tend to get scared a lot right at the top. So before they get to the top, they go too fast. Or either they don't even go to the top and they stop before it gets to the top and they just go up and down and up and down and up and down. So my word of advice is to take the water, push in, go all the way up, take your time, release gently once you get to the top, add water, do the same thing again. And the key is to add water every single time you go up. Now, another thing that is something people should know is your left fingertips and your right fingertips should be very much parallel with each other. So if one hand was up here and this hand was back here and you're pressing in, it's not going to be aligned and it's going to go off center really easily. So I like to lock both hands together and I'm pushing in with both my middle fingers until it pulls up. Great. Now we can finish off the piece. I'm using a rib tool to smooth out the sides. I'm starting a summer collection line and thinking about ice cream, so I'm making a ice cream cone dish. And I use the needle tool to cut off the top. It's not necessary. You could also use your sponge to smooth out the top and the bottom. I'm also going to use my sponge to soak up any water that's on the inside. And I'm going to use my sponge to smooth down anything on the side. And the final step I do, I clean up anything that's left on my wheel. Cool. So now that I'm done, I can take my floss tool, wrap it around my hands, give some tension, and place it down on my wheel and slide it to me really quickly. I'm going to do this a couple times until it moves off the center pad. Once it moves, I can push it off more. Use one of my fingers to get a hold of the bottom. The right hand should be on the side, and I can lift it up and place it onto the wear board. So this is how I make clay at home. Thanks for watching.